Completion of the implementation is the start line, not the finish line, right? And you need to look at this as an evolution of digital transformation. You're now putting in a platform that's going to allow you to keep up with technology and things like that. Because attractions and hospitality in general, are like 10 years behind everybody else, right? From a technology perspective. And on the operator side, what we say is like the problems you have today, if I have to guess, is that you're always wrestling with information.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic.
Woo! Nice
Yes.
head spin there for those watching on YouTube.
Exactly. Question for you.
Go.
So I want to ask this in the right way. Have you ever wrestled with data?
I absolutely have wrestled with data. Yes. I think that data is an excellent wrestling opponent.
A formidable.
A formidable opponent. What
Wrestling
about you?
Yes, I absolutely have 100%. I used to wrestle as a youngster as well.
I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, it was a
Maybe you
long
played
time.
football.
I did play football, baseball, soccer. But before that, I also wrestled. But I've
And
also
the drums. You've got
yeah.
it all. Yeah.
But I've also wrestled with data, no doubt about it. Today, our guest is TJ Christensen, who's the founding partner and CEO of BlueGator, and he talks about wrestling with data. And one of the things I really identified with was when he was talking about different systems, maybe that don't talk to each other, and you have to take all the data that each one of those systems has, and you have to bring it together in some sort of way that you have to be able to make sense of it and be able to use it. Oh, I identified with that in a big way.
So if you've ever asked yourself, wouldn't it be nice if, and then fill in the blank, this episode might be a light bulb moment for you, because TJ goes deep into, like you said, really wrestling with data that helps to connect the dots between the systems. You got your ticketing system for nonprofit attractions, zoos, museums, aquarium. There's their fundraising and their membership and their donor systems. There could be so many systems at play. How do you make sure you're giving the right message to the right individual to create the right outcome that you're trying to see from it that maximizes the guest experience as well as the business key metrics as well?
Whew, that was a lot.
Yeah.
But speaking of those key metrics, he talked about recency, frequency, duration, and spend, sort of the four pillars or key metrics of the type of solutions that they try to implement, and looking at the journey that a guest is on. How can they increase the frequency that someone visits, and the duration, the spend? And those are the kind of things that they can do when they are looking at data that they don't have to wrestle with. They can make heads or tails of it, and then they can put it into use.
Yeah. What I really like about this interview, particularly the way that TJ explains all of it, is he can explain it all very from a technical standpoint of, you've got your point of sale, and you got your CRM, and you've got your email service provider. You have all of these that are linked together. But TJ also comes from the industry as well. He was a parking attendant at Disney MGM Studios before it was Disney's Hollywood Studios, worked his way up through the industry, spent 10 years with Accesso, the robust ticketing platform, and then started BlueGator after that. So he speaks to it not just from a technical standpoint, but really from the lens of the operator as well, that frankly, I think for you and I makes it a lot easier to understand and digest, and probably for a lot of people out there listening as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's another example of connecting the dots between what he can do from a technological standpoint and what that means to an operator, what that means to a facility. Because if you don't know that, if you can't connect those dots, A, number one, you're not going to use the product, and B, you're not going to use it in a way that's actually going to help you.
Yeah. So should we roll out the wrestling mats and weigh in and jump into the, wouldn't be a ring, that's a boxing ring, right?
Yeah, or a circus ring.
Or a circus ring. Should we
Yeah.
wrestle some data with TJ?
Ready, wrestle.
Hey, TJ, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. We're really excited to chat with you today. How are you?
I am awesome. Matt and Josh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on the famed Attraction Pros podcast. So looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it is our pleasure to have you here today. So to kick this off, TJ, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your career background.
Yeah, so I grew up in Delaware, and I got into hospitality by accident, like most of us did. And when I was a sophomore in college, I sort of walked by the library, and there's a flyer for the Walt Disney World College program, and taking a semester off to go hang out in Florida was like I was all about that. So I went down, and my first job was parking at MGM Studios, which is now the Hollywood Studios, and totally caught the bug. Like was just in my DNA, couldn't get rid of it. So as soon as I graduated Delaware, I moved down to Florida and did an advanced internship with Disney and started in sales and marketing. I drove the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire van around Central Florida and dropped off brochures and trained guest service reps on Disney product and events and all that kind of stuff. And sort of grew up there as sort of a cast member for a few years. And then jumped and worked for timeshare for a little bit, working with resorts. And in 2008, there was the economic crash, and my department got laid off, and found myself sort of wondering what I was going to go do next. And ended up having a friend that was working at Accesso, which I had never heard of before, and had no technology background or anything like that, and ended up landing a job as their first salesperson. And spent 10 years at accesso there, which was an amazing ride. Started with just the sort of Lake Mary team in Florida. Then we were acquired by LoQ, and then we bought the Searsware business, and which is was in ski and museums and sort of point of sale. Then Showware, which was performing arts, and then a distribution business and an experience business. And I think when I left, there were like 600 employees in 30 countries and all sorts of stuff. And it was an amazing ride. And then I left there in 2019 and started BlueGator with a friend of mine from accesso, Eric Petruzik. And what we do at BlueGator is we're a Salesforce partner. And basically what we do is we help people implement Salesforce. Primarily, we're helping theme parks, zoos, museums, aquariums leverage the power of Salesforce. So what we do is we take typically we're migrating data from old systems or like fundraising systems. We're connecting it with ticketing systems like accesso or Gateway or Acme or Ticketure or Showware. And then we're bringing that data together. So the attractions for the first time can see who's a first time visitor versus a member versus a donor versus a board member, et cetera. And then we're connecting that with marketing engagement tools to drive just that, marketing engagement, drive per cap spend, repeat visitation, all of that stuff.
Well, TJ, there's a lot to dive into there, but one question I have to ask is, where did the name BlueGator come from?
So I mentioned I went to the University of Delaware. So the University of Delaware are the Fighting Blue Hens. And I went to grad school at the Florida Gator at University of Florida. So Florida Gators, Blue Gator, and the domain was available. So there you have it.
Love it.
Sometimes domain being available is usually just the clinch point right there of just, okay, I can't think about this anymore. I just have to get it. That's it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That was like something short that wasn't like a million characters. Yeah, it was sold. So we've been Blue Gator ever since.
Nice. So your background, TJ, you've got the culmination of marketing, sales, technology, you've done a lot between Disney and accesso and all of that. Curious as far as what, where do all of those intersect? Like when you joined the team at accesso, how did your background in marketing and sales really support that and kind of just how it all ties in together?
Yeah, at accesso it was interesting because I was like when I worked at Disney, we were working on the local market team. So when there was like Star Wars or Star Wars weekends or Super Soap or the change from the Park Hopper product to the Magic Your Way product, we were working with the developers and guest service companies on how to position that and drive sort of attendance when people would land in Orlando and not have tickets. And that experience landed really well when I was at accesso when we were talking to operators about how do we sell more tickets, and being familiar with the third party distribution strategies and players, being familiar with how important that part of the business is for operations and stuff like that, and then being able to, quite frankly, just catch up on the technology side, was a really good. It really helped me in the early days at accesso to sort of connect all those dots, because I felt like I was coming from more of the operator side and marketer side at a venue, even though Walt Disney World is a much larger, enterprise than most of the organizations we were working with. That helped me kind of connect all those there. And then the learning experience was awesome because not only were we like rolling up our sleeves with the operators on like helping them take advantage of, not everybody, it seems crazy, but not everybody was all about e-commerce back in 2008. Like, and not everybody was even about mobile. Like I remember we used to sell a mobile app back in the day, and we were advertising mobile apps, and we had people laughing at us that like, oh, that's a fad, and like mobile first store, and like it's crazy to think about, but like yeah, being able to sort of take advantage of all of those and work with operators on how they're going to leverage that new technology was an incredible experience, over the course of 10 years of seeing that all evolve, and be able to again leverage the experience that I had working sort of at Disney to start.
Well, TJ, I want to go back to that Disney experience just for a second, and thinking about that time, even you said you worked in parking, right? As a cast member.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the hospitality bug kind of got you. What is it about that experience that you're still able to use today in what you do with BlueGator?
Well, I think it's connecting to the guest experience, right? So like, as a college kid working in parking, you can take two approaches to a shift standing in the middle of blacktop, sort of waving people on. You can just wave them, or you can like make it a show. And, some days I did that, some days I just waved them in. But like you can make an impact of where people come up and be like, oh, you made my day, or, this, that, or engaging with them on the tram and stuff like that. And what I talk to our team about, we work with a lot of arts and cultural institutions. So, zoos, museums, aquariums. And it's not just about the ones and zeros. It's about the impact that experience that we're helping enable can have on someone's trajectory in life, right? Someone goes to a zoo and experiences something at the zoo or something at a science center can change the trajectory of their, childhood and life. Like that's how people become animal husbandry experts and conservation experts, and, pursue science and stuff like that. And to play a small portion in that, like, that's what sort of hung with me. Like, I remember, I had a leader at Walt Disney World that was, she was talking about like, we're sort of just talking about when you have bad days. And she was like, the one thing that my sister reminds me of, and her sister worked in the military, she's like, when you have no matter what your day is like, someone at Walt Disney World is having the best day of their life somewhere. So when you're having a not so great day, just go to the parks and watch people turn the corner and see the castle. Like, and connecting back to that. And we always did that at accesso to try and connect back to that experience that we're having, playing some part in magical experiences or family vacations or things like that. And I think that's what we're also trying to do at BlueGator is connect those experiences in a way to have some sort of small impact on someone's life. That is the one thing that's hung with me forever. And that's like, when I talk about like it gets into your bloodstream, those are the things that they're always there.
I just want to take that clip and watch it every single day and every single morning. And that's how I want to start my day. I'm just hearing that message right there. It's such a powerful, such an important message, and such a reminder of why we do what we do. And we get caught up in the minutia and the day-to-day and the operating tasks and all of those things. And you got to pull back and remind yourself, yeah, there's somebody who's having the greatest day of their life and can be changing the trajectory of their life and their career. So thank you so much for bringing that into the conversation. Connecting that then to the technology piece of it, can we dive a little bit deeper into BlueGator and what the engagement really looks like and how you help them really leverage Salesforce and how that makes the impact on their business?
Yeah, so great question. So there's a couple different layers to kind of unpack there. So one, Salesforce, for those that are familiar or are not familiar, Salesforce is a CRM or customer relationship platform. But more so, that's what people think about Salesforce, but it's a huge technology company that has marketing tools and Slack and Tableau and Salesforce CRM and all sorts of things like that. And they have different CRM clouds that are focused on different industries like financial services and nonprofit and media and technology and so on and so forth. So we primarily play in the nonprofit space there. So there's an industry cloud that's purpose built for nonprofits to help with fundraising, right? So a lot of our customers are coming off of other systems onto Salesforce to leverage the nonprofit, and we saw this when we were at Accesso, where people would come on to Salesforce, they're like, we need an integration to Salesforce, and the ticketing systems would build them. They'd push the data over to Salesforce and be like, all right, job done. And there were consultants in the middle that didn't understand venues, but understood Salesforce, and they never went like really well. And the gap that we fill is we understand the operational side of venues, which are very complex, right? It's not just not to diminish regular nonprofits, but they have all the complexities of a typical nonprofit married up with millions of visitors coming in and lots of data coming in. So what we do is we migrate all that data and get that into Salesforce so it's nice and clean. And then we start bringing in ticketing data. And ticketing data is by nature kind of messy. It's kind of messy, right? Like if I go to Kenny, I live in Pittsburgh. So if I go to Kennywood 5 years in a row, there are 5 TJ Christensens in that ticketing system, more than likely, right? Even if I use the same email address, all that stuff. Ticketing systems are not CRMs. Ticketing systems are built for entitlement. They're entitlement engines and transaction engines, right? So oftentimes, we would see there's situations where people are like, consultants would say, oh, the ticketing system is messing up your data or whatever. And the reality is the ticketing system is not messing up their data. That's just how the data is. You need to know how to treat that data, then collapse it from an identity perspective so that you know that this is the one TJ Christensen and here are all the transactions, and then marry that up with all the fundraising information. Because then from there, you can do all sorts of wild and wonderful things from a marketing engagement perspective that, depending on where you are in sort of the attractions hierarchy, you're always sort of looking up at like, oh, if we had the resources of fill in the blank, like we could do these things, or, whether it's people or money or whatever. And we're like, hey, you can do those if you pick the right tools, the right partners, and the right use cases to light up, you can make a material difference. And that's what we do inside of the Salesforce ecosystem. And we use that CRM, right, for nonprofits and people and all that stuff, and connect that with marketing inside of that ecosystem. And then, we'll layer on some Tableau stuff too for visualizations and things like that. So it helps, our sort of marketing speak is like, you can operationalize your data, but what that means is whether your guest services, your membership, your fundraising, you can see the same data. It's providing it's providing visibility to everybody on the team of what's going on with a particular person or company or whatever that's interacting with the venue.
So TJ, there's a lot again to unpack there. Like you're giving us some really, really great information, and I'm wondering if we can think about this from the operator side, because you said that's one of the things you do, right? You've got the BlueGator side and you kind of connect those dots with the operator. And I'm curious, for operators who may not be as well versed in all the things that you just talked about, like how do you, and maybe this is a sales technique, how do you get them to see all the great things that you can do, but then they have to understand how they apply it in their business.
Yeah. So the first thing we do is we talk about that, this is a journey. It is not a, we're going to do this in 6 months and you're going to be off and running. Usually the completion of the implementation is the start line, not the finish line, right? And you need to look at this as an evolution of digital transformation. You're now putting in a platform that's going to allow you to keep up with technology and things like that, because attractions and hospitality in general are like 10 years behind everybody else, right? From a technology perspective. And on the operator side, what we say is like the problems you have today, if I have to guess, is that you're always wrestling with information. You're taking data out of a ticketing system, you're throwing it in Excel, you're trying to dedupe on it, you're trying to figure out who's visited how many times, and you've got all these macros, and it's just, you might be running SQL queries on top of it. You're wrestling with it. You're just fighting with the data nonstop to get it into a position where you can then load it into an email system and send an email. And because you're not confident in the data, the emails that you're sending are like shotgun blasts. They're not personalized. There's a degree of being targeted, but not to the degree that makes a material difference. So in addition to that, again, you've got lots of different operations inside of an operation. You've got group sales that's bringing, corporate events in. You've got guest services that's looking at, trying to triage the guest service issue that's happening where someone, wants a refund because something happened or, all sorts of things, lost and found. Salesforce is a system that can connect all those things. So Matt, if you walked up, I could see how many times you visited, what you bought, the last email we sent to you. If we're talking to your, if we had you connected to a company, if we were talking to your company about having an event, like seeing all of that data in one spot so that you're not stepping on each other's toes from an operator perspective. The groups inside the operation aren't stepping on each other's toes.
I've got to imagine that once data gets to its centralized location, like you said, the implementation is not the finish line, it's the starting line. I've got to imagine the number of avenues just opens up so much, and the sky's the limit with the amount that you're able to do and the solutions you can create for the problems that maybe you didn't even realize that you had going into it. Wondering if you could share maybe some of the practical applications of it, or maybe some of the top challenges that you see maybe as being some low-hanging fruit of this is what you should look for, or these are some of the things that the majority of clients take on right away because here's some immediate solutions we can put in now that we have the knowledge, the intelligence to be able to do so.
Yeah. To be quite frank, it can be paralyzing, right? Like now you don't know, the marketing's been asking for all these tools and now they have them and they're like, I don't know where to start. So what we want to focus on maximum impact start like at the beginning. So one of the things, recency, frequency, monetary is sort of like a thing in retail, right? Or quick service like McDonald's. So an example would be at McDonald's, recency. When was the last time Josh came to McDonald's, right? Was it last week, last month, last year? How frequently does Josh come? Does he come once a Saturday with his family and they buy a lot of stuff, or does he come every day and buy a cup of coffee? And then monetary is how much do you spend? So again, do you come every day and buy that cup of coffee, or do you come once a week and buy, 4 meals or whatever? And you segment out your audiences across that and you say, okay, how do we get Josh, who comes every day to buy coffee and a hash brown, or, buy a meal, or you can implement all sorts of strategies. So what we do is we say, okay, we're going to take a similar approach and we call ours RFDS. So recency, when was the last time someone engaged with the venue? Frequency, how often do they come? How do we get that annual visitor to come twice a year? How do we get the member to come instead of 3.5 times a year, 3.75 times a year, right? Because that's gonna increase their propensity to renew, right? Duration for venues where it makes sense. How do we extend their length of stay, right? Example with that would be, if you're at a zoo and you have a mechanism to commute with guests, guests are on site and there's a keeper talk or there's something like that going on. How do you alert them of those things that will enhance their experience, right? and get them to stay longer. So duration. And the final thing, we don't say monetary because I think it's confusing. We just say spend. So how do we drive spend? And that can be giving, that can be fundraising and things like that. And then we look at, let's just take some high level segments. Let's look at members. Let's look at day guests, right? So how do we take a day guest and drive recency, frequency, duration, and spend? So how do we get them to book now? Maybe it's a value message or something like that. After they book, how do we get them to come back? Is it a bounce back where it's, upgrade to a membership, or it's a bring a friend ticket or something like that? Or a special event, special access? Duration, when they're on site, how do we extend their stay? That's quite frankly the trickier one, right? Is there a mobile app? Is there a chatbot we can engage with, SMS, something like that? And then spend, how do we try and drive more spend out of each visit, whether it be from a donation perspective or a true like add-on experience or something like that. And we go with and we try and make it as high level as possible. First time visitor, local, inner market, outer market, member, long-term member. And we come up with those so high level segments, and then we take them through RFDS for each one of those segments, and you end up building, sort of architecting these journeys that you can then go, sort of like, okay, we think there's $100,000 to go unlock on this one. Let's go try and do that.
Well, and I would imagine each one of those journeys then gets more and more specific based on the demographics of the user. Like, for a family or a, grandparents or, people with kids or whatever. So is that how granular you get with those journeys as well?
You can, but I mean, I think there's two things here. One, you can go really granular, but you get diminishing. You have to calibrate to your venue, right? Disney, super granular. Kennywood, don't need to go granular, right? You got to calibrate to your guest and how you're interacting with them, right? I'm not saving for years to go to Kennywood. I'm going once a year a couple times a year because it's local. We love it, all that kind of stuff. Disney needs to go to that level. Other organizations, it's not necessarily about going deeper, it's about going wider. We've got that one knocked out, and it's operating the efficiency. We're monitoring how, the conversion rates and things like that. Okay, now let's go tackle the next one and tackle the next one. And then it's slowly tuning those so that you have you're sort of optimizing them. The other thing is, shoot, I just lost it. On the journeys, it's not a master journey of like, oh, this huge complex thing. It's actually more like, when someone does this, do this. And when someone does that, do that. And you end up with lots of those little things, right? Because you'll never be able to anticipate all the twists and turns of each guest experience, right? It's more about when someone, like we talk about eventing, when an event happens, based on who someone is, where someone is, or when someone is, what's the what? I just walked into the front gate. What's the what? I just left, and it's the next day. What are we talking to them about? Those sorts of things versus like, kind of like, it looks like a beautiful mind on a whiteboard. We don't need to get to that level. It's just sort of like simple, if this, then that.
So this ties in with another question that we have that I think you've started kind of alluding to a little bit, but on your website, you list, some of the problems that your clients have. And one of the challenges they run into is that they're not Disney. And curious, as far as maybe do a little myth busting here, as far as things that people think they can or cannot do because they don't have Disney-sized resources, that things are actually more within their grasp than they realize.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that come to mind when you mention that. Is one, if you're not following Matt Ouimet on LinkedIn, he is an awesome follow for all things theme park and hospitality. And we had an opportunity to work with him when he was at Cedar Fair, and he would talk about like, he has a long storied career at Disney, then goes and runs Cedar Fair, and he would say, hey, we're not Disney, we got to calibrate for what we are. And same thing like what I just talked about between Kennywood and Disney. And, I also mentioned earlier, like you're always looking up the food chain of like, oh, well, if we had these resources or these tools, we'd be able to do that too. So what we try to do is use that RFDS framework to sort of like calibrate the organization to things that are going to help move the needle in a way that are impactful. And they feel like they're keeping up with the Joneses, if you will. They are keeping up with technology. They're able to based on, they're able to do some personalization and pull in name and visitation history and maybe even ride history and things like that. Like those are things that are possible if you choose the right tools and are diligent about, let's make sure we get this locked in before we move on to 800 other ideas that we have. Like, let's get this one flushed out and then move on.
So another thing that was on your website, it talks about technology should be the solution, not the problem. So do you have examples where maybe technology gets in the way and it does become the problem?
Yeah, and I think it's more of like legacy systems that are that aren't connected, right? So like that's one of the things that we really like about Salesforce, because it's a platform that can connect into all sorts of systems that you have. An accounting system, a fundraising system, a ticketing system, a point of sale system, and it allows you to pull all that data together, and then you can, if the new greatest ticketing system that's ever been invented becomes available, you can then plug that in and you've got your platform intact. And where technology gets in the way is when people are trying to do all these point-to-point integrations between all these systems, and it ends up being like spaghetti and spider webs versus like push into a platform and then kind of like see it that way. So, when I talked about wrestling with data, right? That's where technology, we have all these tools. Why can't we do this stuff? Well, because everything's siloed and disconnected, or really fragile connection. So, building more robust integrations into a platform where you can then, power the data from there.
How do you determine the answers, I would say? So, you're a technology company, but how much of a consultative element do you bring in? You talk about me walking into McDonald's, I get a coffee. Now I'm, going to be served the hash brown, or be, kind of position that. Once you have the if this, then that, how do you determine really what the then that should be, knowing that that's the most optimal solution, and knowing the infinite, paralyzing, using your term, number of permutations that are available?
Yeah, it's a couple different things. A lot of the times the clients know, right? They're like, if we could connect these things, we'd want to go do these things. Like, they can, a lot of times they can rattle them off once you sort of walk them down the path of, okay, this is the data that you have that you can take action on in real time. What would you want to do with that? If you knew when Matt scanned in at this park and you could communicate anything to him, what would you want him to know? They're like, oh, well, we'd want him to know this, this, and this. Like, okay, well, there's your what. The other thing that we do is we'll do like, it's not that elegant of an exercise, but it's really like spreadsheets. Like, okay, if you could sell what are all the things that you'd like to sell to a person or market to a person, like pretend they can have the most amazing experience possible. Well, they come in and they buy a daily ticket. Well, then we'd want to sell them a VIP tour, and then we'd want to make sure they have a dining plan. And then we want to make sure they have this and make sure they have that, right? And we'll look at all those different things and we'll say, we'll take an add-on experience in venue and a VIP tour, right? An add-on experience might be $20 and the VIP experience might be 100. And you'd say, okay, if we know someone bought a daily ticket and then we promote the add-on ahead of time. Actually, a great example of this is the Spy Museum. The Spy Museum's fantastic organization, great museum in DC. They have a James Bond exhibit. It's a special limited time thing. How mad would you be if you bought a ticket to the Spy Museum, you didn't realize they were doing James Bond, you turn up, it's sold out, and that's your only day in DC? So if you know someone bought a ticket, but they did not buy James Bond, let's offer them the James Bond before they show up on Wednesday, right? And there's lots of examples like that. So you tie a value to that and say in that case, it's $20, probably not, but $20. And your conversion rate on that is going to be X. Then you're like, okay, we know we have 100,000 people that buy online. This is $20 and our conversion rate is what? Here's what the math of that upsell is. Now, what are the other ones? VIP tour. Maybe it's a bigger, lower percentage, higher cart size, and you go down the path that way. And then they start to pick and they're like, well, I can make, if we're taking a guess and if we're right, that's a $100,000 opportunity that we could go chase. Let's go figure that one out and see if it's viable or not. And they then prioritize based on the value that it provides the organization, or reinforce the strategy that they have, right? And it might not necessarily be about dollars, it's about awareness. We talk a lot about nonprofits, and it's not always about shaking people upside down and all their coins fall out of their pockets. It's really about like, It's shocking how many people go to aquariums, zoos, and museums and have no idea that they're nonprofits. They have no idea that they have like conservation outreach and things like that. So, if you could let someone know before they come about all the conservation messaging that you have when they're here, or programs, and like post, hey, here are the STEM programs that we have going on and things like that. It's about pulling people into that mission, not necessarily about the dollars, but again, that's where you blend in the prioritization on strategy versus revenue.
Is that harder to judge? Like if you're saying we want people to be more aware of our conservation efforts versus you're doing that upsell, you can measure that upsell in dollars and cents, right? How do you measure that the awareness of your STEM programs and your conservation efforts?
It's more complicated for sure. But if you think about it, like, so if I go to the Pittsburgh Zoo, right? And we don't work with the Pittsburgh Zoo, but they're local. So Pittsburgh Zoo, and I get a message afterwards that talks about, something that they're doing with maybe orangutans in somewhere, right? And if I can measure the clicks on that, right? I can measure the engagement on the email, the conversion on the website. And then if it takes me to a page around orangutans where I can do a one-time donation of $25 or $10 or recurring, you can measure those engagement points along the way and say, okay, we're seeing this, or, maybe you're doing that, but then maybe you're doing that on the front side of the visit. And then there's like an adopt an animal call to action on site. They all kind of tie together. And again, attribution gets a little squishy on like, those sorts of things, but you can just sort of look at engagement versus increase in on-site engagement or questions or, visits or, all sorts of things like that.
Nice. So you also talk about silos too, and it's on the website. I know that you've shared a little bit here, but can you talk about really, I would say, helping to tear down those silos? And I know you've spoken to this a little bit, but really kind of like emphasizing like the problem of why, or not why they exist, but when they exist, of the problems, the challenges the organization can have.
Yeah, I mean, so this happened once before we were engaged when they were not using all their data tied together. So they had a volunteer system over here and they had a development system or fundraising system over here. And this is where they keep track of all their trustees and board members who are also considered volunteers because they get entitlements for being board members and trustees. So as a volunteer, to maintain your benefits, you have to volunteer X number of times. So someone pulled a list of people that hadn't volunteered in X number of whatever the frequency was. And they sent them a very nice sort of like, by the way, to maintain your benefit, you need to volunteer for shifts and things like that. Well, that list also included board members and trustees who had not signed up for shifts because that's not what they do, but they are considered volunteers. And the organizational spin that caused of board members being upset because they're told they just received an email that said their access is going to be revoked because they haven't volunteered for a shift. I mean, it's kind of like a silly but very real example. And think about the organizational swirl that happens then. All of a sudden, the managing director is trying to manage his relationship with board members that are upset. The fundraising team is upset because they had $1 million ask out to somebody that is now sideways and they have to apologize. The volunteer coordinator is humiliated because they made a mistake that is now causing all of these other things, right? Like that's an example of one. Or where we talk about sort of stepping on each other's toes, you could also see that with group sales, right? So group sales is, maybe I'm talking to someone as a donor, and group sales calls me out of the blue to have our BlueGator holiday party there. And, and I'm annoyed because you're asking me for all this money, but like, you don't even know that, so-and-so's, I'm already talking to so-and-so. You're not like, I'm not going to give you any money. You can't even get your system straight, or, that it's sort of those things that they sound kind of silly and whatever, but they cause a lot of tension when you're trying to deal with people where you have big asks of like, hey, can you donate $100,000 to help us improve XYZ? And then you get people stepping on each other's toes. That's an example of where silos can be problematic. Not to mention, in addition, that just the guest services side of it. Someone that's in front of me that is that has a guest service issue every time they show up, right? I can see that. Versus someone that is in front of me and is being maybe not so nice to me, but I can see that they also have donated $1 million. Maybe maybe I have a little bit different disposition of that, or they have a huge event that's coming up and is, worth X number of dollars to the organization. Like, it's not always about the dollars, but just sort of understanding who you're talking to from a guest service perspective and all the different ways that they're engaged. The hourly, employee that's, just working that shift doesn't know that, so-and-so is a major donor or was on the founding board or something like that. Being able to surface that can make a big impact in how you're servicing guests.
Well, you have certainly given us a lot to think about and lots of great information again. And I want to switch gears with a question here, maybe going back again to your early hospitality days. But if you weren't doing what you're doing right now, if you weren't the founder and CEO of BlueGator, what do you think you'd be doing?
So I always joke that like when I signed up for the advanced internship when I graduated from school, and the day that I got the call that I got that job, I had spent all day interviewing for Dade Paper up in like North Philly. And I was like, I would have been like Jim Halpert or, had the career that I had. So probably less satisfying, less fun paper guy. I would hope that is not where I would have ended up, but like that's sort of my ongoing joke is that I would have ended up working at Dade Paper because that was the only other gig that I had on the radar.
Sounds like you made the right decision and went down the road.
Yeah.
Right.
TJ, as we start to wind this down here, we really appreciate you taking the time to share all of this amazing information with us. If people want to learn more about BlueGator or if they want to get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
Yeah, they can email me directly at tj.christensen@bluegator.com, CHRISTENSEN, or on our website. They can submit a request for a meeting, and they can catch me on LinkedIn. They can follow us on LinkedIn, either BlueGator or myself, and DM me there. So,
excellent, excellent. Well, TJ, thank you so much for your time and your insight today. We really appreciate it. And for everybody out there who's watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.